All right, welcome to Jay's analysis. We have not had anybody really that I can think of, at least in a long time, from the domain of science. And you might be surprised because wouldn't we want to vindicate and speak about our theories and our analyses from the vantage point of the actual physical data? And the answer is yes. So we have Dr. Edward Dutton. He's known as the Jolly Heretic online, and he is new to my sphere of things because I hadn't heard of him until fairly recently in terms of getting into his material. I think I heard his name a while back, but I dug into a really lengthy interview that he did with Tim Kelly on the subject matter of witchcraft and feminism, and was the witch kind of a precursor to the feminists? And he is an evolutionary psychologist, and he's published many books. We'll talk about some of those. His website is Jolly Heretic. He's also known as that on YouTube and BitChute and Odyssey. Of course, we know that YouTube is not pro free speech, so probably a lot of this material will end up being on alternative outlets. But Dr. Edward Dutton, thank you for coming on.
Hello, how do you do? Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're going to be talking about IQ, feminism, witchcraft, politics of guilt, all this kind of stuff. And a lot of his research overlaps with this. And so one thing I want to say is part of the reason I want to have you on is because, coming from the domain of philosophy and the domain of religion, I know you have a background in that, and you switched over into being more in the domain of science. I've noticed that a lot of people in the religious world, especially as we look at modern Christianity, modern Western religion, it's going in the direction of being woke. And the irony here is that so many people who would consider themselves religious, Christian, whatever in the Western world, they would adhere to evolution as a philosophical system. They think it's reconcilable with Christianity, et cetera, et cetera. Whether that is or isn't the case, it's odd to me that so many people give credence to this view. And yet the evidence and information and the studies, the data that comes out of the domain of evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology, they don't like it because it doesn't fit with the woke victimhood narrative. So first question is, do you think that is the case? Does it seem that people are not going where the evidence and the data actually leads from your work? And is that because they're really capitulating to an ideological assumption that they have to stretch the data to fit the ideology?
Yes, that's precisely what they're doing. So you have an ideology effectively, or you could even call it a quasi religion, an ersatz religion, in which you fetishize equality and the notion of equality, and also harm avoidance above all else, and above even the notion of objective truth. And so it must follow from that if objective truth must bend to those dogmatic assumptions. And so the dogmatic assumption of equality is that all sexes are psychologically equal, races are psychologically equal, evolution essentially stops at the neck. And even that they try to argue that evolution, the difference is evolution, they don't accept evolution. So it is quite an interesting thing. They don't accept, you say, oh, they accept evolution and whatever, these people that are religious and a bit woke. No, they don't, because what the fundamental notion in Christianity was that humans are a group apart. Humans have a soul, humans are special, humans are imbued with some aspect of the divine, humans are not animals, they are something more. And what Darwin was arguing is no, there is no essentialist border between the human and the non-human. Humans are an advanced form of ape, and that is the case both physically, obviously, but also mentally. And as with apes, there are different, with chimpanzees, there are different sort of subgroups within chimpanzees and bonobos that you can call something like races. And not quite like that, but something like that. And they look distinct, and they have distinct behavior patterns, and they are evolved to different ecologies, and they vary in phenotypic frequencies, and they are of physical and psychological traits. And they vary in this way because they are adapted to significantly different ecologies, and it must be, if we are an advanced form of ape, it must be exactly the same with humans. And similarly, there will be psychological differences between humans, between different racial groups, between men and women, whatever, and these will be substantially genetic in nature. These will be adaptations to different ecologies and whatever. And there will be physical differences between humans, and these will be important and relevant. And these won't be, they say, oh, it's superficial differences like skin color. That's just nonsense. It's not superficial at all. It's not superficial. If you have a skin like I have, and you live in sub-Saharan Africa, you can get sunburnt and get skin cancer and die. If you have very dark skin and you live in northern Finland, where I live, in the winter, you can't synthesize enough vitamin D and you get ill. But they don't accept that. So ultimately, what we have is just a new creationism, really, whereby these woke people essentially perceive humans as fundamentally different from other animals. Evolution does not apply to them. They'll say they believe in evolution,
right,
because they will want to intelligence signal, and there is a general perception that, oh, I mean, I'm not saying it's right, but there is a general perception that all intelligent, educated people accept evolution. So they will, of course, say that they accept evolution, but it is what we might call a bowdlerized, a diluted understanding of evolution, whereby, in essence, it doesn't seem to apply to humans. Although, on the other hand, of course, they're not consistent. We can look at that later. They're not consistent. So in some of their discourse, they will implicitly accept that it does. But yeah, so I think that's what you're dealing with a lot of these woke churches. They don't really believe in evolution at all.
Yeah, you mentioned the fetish of equality and harm avoidance over objective truth. To me, those sound like actually typically what we would characterize as feminine characteristics, feminine virtues. And a lot of people have characterized today's society as moving more and more in the direction of feminism because of the tendency amongst women to favor the idea of equality, everybody getting a fair shake. And I was watching a video the other day of a person who was red-pilled arguing with a woman, red-pilled arguing with another woman who's a radical feminist. And the feminist said to the woman, after she had made an objective argument, this kind of blew my mind. She said, I don't have to listen to anything that you say because you're pretty privileged. In other words, because you're attractive. I couldn't believe this.
No, this is brilliant. This is brilliant. This is the new thing. And the thing is, there is a logic to it, because you will be treated better if you're better looking. You will be treated better if you're tall.
But
sorry.
But the idea that I can discount what you're saying because you're attractive, that's the new sort of like this new line amongst the woke, is like, no, you're pretty, everything is now a weaponizable one-up thing. But it's like an inverted strategy of one-upping, where it's like the most oppressed, this would lead to basically the most deformed, the most hobbled over goblin person being the best person, because they're the most oppressed.
If everything's based around jealousy and resentment and hatred and whatever, then that's exactly where it leads. But let's look at that, though. I think you made quite an interesting point there about the feminization issue. So one of the things I've looked at in my most recent book, it's called Breeding the Human Herd, Eugenics, Dysgenics, and the Future of the Species. It's Jonathan Haidt's idea that we have 5 key moral foundations, and they reflect the fact that we humans are pack animals that are in a fight with other pack animals under harsh Darwinian conditions for resources and so on. So we have to be pack oriented, but equally we have to be able to kind of get to the top of the pack. Because at the top of the pack, that disproportionately, it's the high status men that end up breeding and passing on their genes and getting selected for, or whatever. And also, we just have to make sure that we get our fair share. So you have these 2 sets of foundations. You have the group-oriented foundations, the binding foundations of obedience to authority, of in-group loyalty, and of sanctity versus disgust. Because generally what religion will do is it will take that which is adaptive and it will make it holy. It will make that which is adaptive into the will of God, such that, that it is done, and it will take that which is maladaptive and it will say that is taboo, that is disgusting. So those are the group-oriented foundations, and then you have the individually oriented foundations of essentially equality and harm avoidance. Equality, i.e., you want to make sure that you get as much as anybody else as an individual, so equality, and harm avoidance means harm avoidance for you. So you don't want to necessarily have to lay your life down for the group. So we have these two sets of moral foundations, and they kind of have to be kept in balance. It's maladaptive to have no concern with individually oriented foundations, because then, of course, you're sending people to their deaths, and eventually you're going to get rebellion and it's just and so on. But equally, you can't be too concerned with individually oriented foundations, because then the group just balkanizes and collapses and fissions and whatever, and so and gets overtaken by other groups. So that's no good either. Now, if we look at the fundamental differences between men and women, then we can start to see, with regard to your point, why it is that women are much more focused on individually oriented foundations. What does the woman actually, what's the man evolved to do? The man is evolved to be a part of a large polity, a large group in which he bonds with other men in order to form an army. And he will be open to other men so long as those men have talent, so long as those men are loyal, so long as those men are brave. Then he's open to them, and he'll bond with them, and he'll form a large group. And that's what men will tend to do. And there will be something, in a sense, kind of mercenary about it. I mean, if you think, I don't know about you, but I'm 42. How many people am I still friends with from when I was at secondary school? None.
Not many.
Now, not right now with women, it doesn't work like that. It's very, very different. Why? Because the woman is evolved until really very recently, we were polygamous. And so the female is evolved to a polygamous environment in which what these women want to do is be part of the harem of a very high status male. And so that's what they do. And once they do that, well, of course, eventually you need help looking after your children and things like this. And so what they tend to do is they tend to form, because it's their children, very, very intense one-on-one friendships with other co-wives.
Mm-hmm.
And these co-wives will allo-parent their children. So very, very babysit basically their children. Very, very intense one-on-one friendships, one-on-one, very intense. Now, if they're going to be very intense, you can only have a small number of them. So women will tend to have a relatively small number of friendships that are extremely intense, whereas men might have loads of friends, but they're not particularly intense. I mean, male friendships, you're not based around sharing information about your vulnerability and about your feelings and stuff like that. That's considered to be gay. And you'll only do that as a man in a very difficult set of circumstances in which there's a really serious problem, and then fine.
Well, that was the second half of the interview, was all my vulnerability. So I guess.
Well, yeah, you were going to tell me about your various problems. Yeah, I see. Well, we could leave that till later, perhaps. Yeah, of course. But so that's what they do, and it has to be they have to be able to trust each other. So it has to be a relationship of complete equality. So they're very, very into equality. Secondly, we're dealing with people that are looking after little children and whatever that can get killed. Yep. So they're very, very high in harm avoidance. And women will put those traits, equality and harm avoidance, way above everything else. And then if you think about the nature of women, if you're a woman and you want to get status, well, women are physically weak, so therefore they will lose in a fair fight.
Sure.
Women are high in in neuroticism, basically. They feel negative feelings strongly compared to men. This means they feel all these feelings like anxiety and jealousy and envy and fear of being hurt and whatever, much more strongly than men. And so if you're like that, which they are, then the way that you attain status is covert. You attain status by signaling about your equality, by signaling about harm avoidance, by signaling about victimhood.